Okay, hello. My name is Erwan Goriou. I'm working for ST Microelectronics, sorry, and I'm working as an assignee in the Light group. This session is about how to port the STM32H7 dual core in Zephyr. So how it has been done today and what is coming next and maybe what is missing. So I won't. So let's go. I may not discuss about bacon, but we'll see. So a bit of context. So STM32H747 is the first real dual core for STM32 SoC that was made. So it has been released beginning of this year, and in June I upstreamed a very basic support in Zephyr. So initial focus of this work was to enable the boot on each core and with basic applications. So this work showed some challenges in current Zephyr state to allow a fully safe and functional usage on multi-core SoCs. So I don't. This presentation does not pretend to be exhaustive on the SoC architecture. So aim here is just to provide some basis for development and understanding on the next steps. So quick target introduction. The SoC is made of two cores, so Cortex M7 and a Cortex M4. So the M7 can run up to 480 megahertz, and the CM4 can run up to 240 megahertz. So there is a reset and clock controller which is capable of peripheral allocation, which is important. There is also a hardware semaphore IP that was made specifically to handle the dual core specifics. So there are some information on the Disco board that has been ported, but I will skip this part because not of many interest for now. So yes, I forgot to speak about the agenda. So we'll go first about describing the essential parts to deal with the both cores. Then I will explain how the board porting was made, and discuss a bit about resource sharing at runtime, and finally boot options and a plan for intercore communication. So the first important IP for dealing with the two cores is the reset and clock control IP. So sorry to dive directly into the details, but so it's capable of peripheral allocation through dedicated CPU registers. So this will do the peripheral clock gatings. So there is one bank which is capable of do the clock gating for CPU1 and one clock dedicated to bank clock gating for CPU2. So there is so some common registers that are accessible by both cores for the IP configuration. And then, so there is a bank which is mapped at 3 different locations. So a common address that are used by both cores, and if this address is accessed by CPU1 only the CPU1 register bank is accessed. When accessed by CPU2, it is only the CPU2 register banks which is accessed. Then CPU1 can configure maybe the CPU2 register bank by accessing the CPU2 address and vice versa. So we can configure CPU1 from CPU1 and CPU for either from CPU1 and CPU2 and vice versa. So a quick quick picture of the clock tree. So what we can see here is that the CPU2 clock is linked with the CPU1 clock just with one prescaler. So on this prescaler should be minimum 2, so it's not shown here. But so this is important for clock configuration. It means that there is a direct relationship between CPU1 clock configuration and CPU2 clock configuration. So this is important for the next steps. So next IP, which is important for to handle dual cores, is the hardware semaphore IP. So which is made of 32 register by 32 register of 32 bits of semaphore. This is made so to ensure synchronization between different processes and across the cores. So it provides so non-blocking mechanism to lock semaphore in an atomic way, interrupt generation when semaphore is freed, semaphore clear protection, and global semaphore clear per core ID. And finally, the last IP, which is impacted by the dual core architecture, is the extended interrupt controller. So this IP is made for interrupts on event configuration. So in Zephyr, this is mostly used for GPIO interrupt configuration. So yes, this is what we'll able to say that to configure if we want to configure an IRQ on a rising or falling edge and this kind of stuff. So there are in this IP there will be so the core agnostic some core agnostic registers so that will be used to configure, for instance, yes, the rising or falling edge, because this will be done for one application. This does not depend on the core. But then there are core dedicated registers that allow to mask the interrupt to one or the other core. And all these registers are accessible from both cores. And last, so there are some dual core dedicated option bytes. So on STM32 SOCs, the option bytes are user settable options that are located in flash that are persistent across switch off and off cycles. So they require specific write procedure to be set and reset. And the programmation could be done easily using STM32 cubeprogrammer tool. So the option bytes that are specific to dual core are these 4 option bytes. One which will control the boot of the CM7 core at switch on. Same for the CM4 the boot of the CM4 core. And the address on which we expect the binary for each core. So now I will go into the impact of having a dual core when it comes to board configuration. Having a dual core target brings some new constraints. We need to deal with these constraints with minimum code addition in order to keep the compatibility with the existing single core implementation and to ease the maintenance. So we'll see how this has been implemented in next slides. What I will do is I will compare the dual core porting with the single core porting. So if you're not familiar with single core porting, I will try to explain quickly what is made and why this is made. But I will mainly focus on the dual core impact. So first there are some CMake stuff on the support, which is not impacted by the dual core, obviously. So I will go directly to the device tree. So as you may know, device tree is used in Zephyr to describe the hardware and provide its configuration at boot time. So for a single core target, we will have the first DTSI, at least for STM32, which is used as a common base for one series of STM32. For instance, the STM32 F4 will have a STM32 F4.DTSI that will be used in all the F4 series. Then STM32 then we'll go into the variants DTSI that may add some additional resources or peripheral dedicated to this variant. And then the variant that includes the package information that will define flash size, or sometimes as well the RAM size. And finally, we'll have the board device tree that includes the package DTSI that and describe and enable the BSP resources. Yes, that's it. So, how can we do the same for dual core? So here we'll have to describe information for both cores. So we'll have a first STM32H7 DTSI that defines the common base of resources that are available to either cores, and we also define the CPU nodes for both cores. Then so we'll have the same as in single core. So there is the first H7 DTSI file which is common to all the series, to the whole series, and then H747 SOC variant. But so this is same, but then we'll have a package DTSI file which will be dedicated to one or the other core. So for instance, on the M7 DTSI, we'll delete the M4 CPU node and assign a flash size and a base address for the M7 core. So this is the DTSI file that are used for the SoC. There is also a DTSI file for the DISCO, for the board, actually. Because on one board we'll have some resources that some description that will not vary depending if it's one core or the other. So we describe at this point the common BSP resources with the disable status. So for instance, the LEDs, the buttons, and so on will be described once in this file in the disable state. And last, we'll have the actual DTS for the target. So that include the SOC DTSI file and the BSP DTSI. And in this file, we finally enable the assigned resources. So this is what will that will help to assign resources to one core or the other. So for instance, we'll be able to say, okay, this slide is enabled on M7 or in the M4 DTS. So now I'll go to the kconfig. So for a single core board, so there are 3 devconfig kconfig files that are used to describe a board. So first kconfig.board that define a kconfig for the target. Then a conditional kconfig file, which is used for conditional configuration. This is important because this is what this is used for abstraction and application level, and this is important for application portability, so that we don't enable all the peripheral in all the application, but only when application needs them. So to save resources and so on. And last, a devconfig file, which is used for typical board configuration, in which we declare the general characteristics that are always valid for a target, like the architecture, the SOC, fact that we are using MPU. So also we do the basic drivers activation, the ones that are always used by all applications, at least the ones that are upstream. And finally, clock configuration. So in case of a dual core SoC, so the proposal was to so in the board kconfig, we'll define 2 targets, and for each target, we'll be able to select one or the other kconfig flag for the SoC. So this is where we will we'll define if this is Cortex M7 which is used or Cortex M4. Then in the conditional kconfig file, so it will be used for 2 purposes. So the common resources configuration, like if we want to boot in like the boot configuration, okay, and it is also used for static so about common resources configuration will also define the clock configuration, because this will be this has to be synchronous between the 2 cores or the 2 applications. Then the file is also used for static resources allocation. So we can, in a common file, declare if such a peripheral is used into either one core or the other. So this is a bit redundant with device tree, in which we also do resource allocation, but this is the way it is done today in Zephyr, and maybe this is something that we'll have to will be able to improve in a short or medium term, so that the peripheral activation can be done only in device tree. But so far we have to deal with it in device tree and also in kconfig. And finally, we'll have a devconfig file per core, per target. So in which we'll try to so we'll try to minimize its use because we want to because it could be a source of desynchronization. Because since we have two files and we build two applications, if there are desynchronization between in these files, we'll not be able to see them. So we can have a misconfiguration if we enable too much things in these files. I will go directly to the next point, which is the runtime resource sharing. So there are some resources that need to be accessed by both core at runtime, so the clock control, GPIO, and the extended interrupt controller. But I'm short in time, I see, so I will go directly to the next step. I'm sorry for that, because I think this point is important. I would like to share this one before the end of the talk. For intercore communication on H7 on Zephyr RTOS, so we would like to. So the targeted framework is OpenIMP, and in Zephyr, its current implementation requests an interprocessor mailbox subsystem. For instance, there is on STM32MP1, which is a dual core, which is actually a microprocessor with Linux running on Cortex-A and, for instance, Zephyr running on Cortex-M. OpenIMP is used also, but it is using, it has an IPCC IP, which is dedicated to intercore communication, and on top of which the interprocessor mailbox can be implemented, and this is what is used by the OpenIMP framework. This IP is not available in STM32H7, so we have to implement the OpenIMP using the hardware semaphore IP. And so there is nothing today in Zephyr to deal with this. What we will need is hardware spinlock API that could be used to implement an interprocessor mailbox. But also we will need the hardware spinlock, or at least we need HSEM to do real hardware spinlock processing as well. So we have two solutions here. So either we use HSEM, we have hardware spinlock API that will use HSEM, on HSEM, which is used on a IPM. Sorry, I'm not clear here. So either we'll have an IP, an interprocessor mailbox that use the hardware spinlock API that in turn is fully based on the HSEM IP, or we have the IPM on the hardware spinlock that both rely on the HSEM IP. So the two implementations are possible, and two have some changes. So we need to dig a bit to see what we want to propose for this matter. This is the end of the talk. Sorry, I had to skip some few slides. If you have some questions, you can come back to me. But to wrap up this presentation, so things that we miss today for great AMP dual core experience on STM32H7 on Zephyr. So it's a reliable way to split static resources between cores. So we expect that system device tree will help to solve this issue. Also, to complete the resource assignation from kconfig to device tree. So also hardware spinlock API, and finally a way to use the HSM IP to be used both for IPM and hardware spin lock. And so this was it for this presentation. So maybe you have some questions.
Underneath OpenAMP, there's a layer called libmetal that abstracts various ARM cores. Have you ported the Cortex M series to libmetal?
Yeah, I think yes, this is what is used on the MP1.
So this question is not specific to ST, but in Zephyr OpenAMP implementation. So some of the microcontroller architectures like NXP, they don't use full OpenAMP implementation in Linux kernel. So for those, they are using RP Message Lite framework developed by NXP itself. But so for implementing in the Zephyr side, so how should we go about those kind of MCUs? Should we create a sample application, or is it still possible to integrate RP Message Lite into Zephyr?
So for this question, maybe I will give the mic to Maureen here. Sorry.
I don't think we have a firm answer to that right now. You know, the NXP was sometime last year had proposed upstreaming that. At the time, it had a different license on it, and so the community rejected it. There was some interest in potentially revisiting that after the license issue got cleared up. But then the question became, you know, we've got two solutions that do the same thing, so what do we do about that? I don't think we have a firm answer yet.
Any other question? Okay, thank you.